Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of Sliding into My DMs. How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
Pretty cold here in Barovia, I have to say.
Well, thanks for taking the hit for everybody.
I was going to say Neuschwanstein, but yeah, I can see that. In fact, I think if you look closely, you can see Strahd standing on one of the balconies there.
He's right screaming about renewable energy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Remember to winterize your windmills.
Yep.
It's important.
That's right. So
get hags.
Joining me as I was going to say as always, but as usual, not always, but most of the time, we have Corey, we've got Preston, and we have Mr. Rogers, who needs to get a new neighborhood. I think.
Yes.
You can't. Once you're in Barovia, you can't leave.
Right.
That's the point.
Right. Yeah. How do we get you out? Or is that spoiler warning?
Spoiler territory. So we'll just have to play through and figure it out.
Know. All right. That sounds good. Well, okay. So today we have a couple of things that I want to talk about. First, we've got a sort of a quick ruling question that I have to pose to you guys. And then we have a longer discussion as usual about kind of combat and describing combat in your games. But so first up, the quick ruling. All right. I've gotten this a lot because there are times in the builds that I do where I will maybe fail to take the Warcaster feat, and my character has maybe a weapon in each hand, right? And they may not need to cast spells very often, so I don't worry about it too much, but there are times when I'm sort of assuming that I will be able to cast a spell without having the Warcaster feat, particularly for my latest version of the Bladesinger video. And so here's the question. If I have a weapon in each hand and I want to cast a spell as a reaction, so I'm talking shield primarily, but maybe absorb elements, right? Something that like, oh, shoot, I just got hit. Okay. It has a somatic component. I have two weapons in my hand. I don't have the Warcaster feat. Can I drop one of the weapons really quick, cast a shield spell as a reaction? And then theoretically, maybe like on my, when it's my turn, you get to interact with an object as part of using it, as according to the rules, right? So can I scoop down, just like unsheathing my weapon, can I scoop down, pick it up really quick and be able to take my turn as normal, assuming that a creature or a little ferret hasn't come and stolen my sword away from me, which admittedly could happen, right? Or I could get moved, or there obviously things could happen that would prevent me from doing that easily. But assuming that it's still at my feet, what do you think? Drop the sword, cast a shield spell, for example, and then scoop the sword back up and keep going as normal? Or do you think how would you rule it at your table? Let me ask you that. Or what do you think rules as written indicate if it's something different than how you would rule it?
So I'll be bad cop this week.
Okay. This week.
Apparently I'm the tough one. But the problem that we run into with making that part of your reaction is there are certain things that no longer work as intended. The biggest example is heat metal. That spell requires you to have the weapon in your hand at the start of your turn, but if you can use a reaction and just drop your weapon at any time, it completely invalidates. It's basically like counterspelling heat metal anytime you want.
Just drop.
Yep. So I would say that using that type of action is not considered a free action that's usable with a reaction. I would say most free actions is what I would label those as, are not usable as part of a reaction, because you're literally just reacting to something the enemy does, not taking part of your turn to do that free action.
Okay.
One other thing that I think kind of goes hand in hand with that is the fact that the Warcaster feat specifically has a mention in there about needing to or being able to cast spells with
somatic components if your hands are full.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you take that feat, that's a great bonus for that. If you don't take it, but you can still drop it, then it's just like, well, Warcaster's a little bit less valuable as a feat now.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I think you're going to have to just forego your extra bonus attack each turn and have an open hand if you want to do that.
Right. Or take, because in my case, a lot of the times I had a use for my bonus action many times. I'm just thinking about the Blade Singer now, but my bonus action often was used to, say direct the animated objects that I've conjured and, et cetera, et cetera. And so, or to summon a Shadow Blade or to start my blade song or whatever. And so part of me was sort of on the fence of, maybe I should just have a rapier. It's a slightly more damage on a single attack. My bonus action is going to be taken up a lot of the times anyway. I don't know if I want to get Warcaster, blah, blah, blah. So anyway, okay. So, but it sounds like, Corey, your main concern is not so much in the scooping a weapon up on your turn and being able to use it as it is dropping a weapon as part of your reaction and then using your reaction to cast a spell.
Because it cheapens some of the other aspects.
Exactly. I don't have an issue with you picking up your weapon as part of your movement or as part of your action, because you drop your weapons when you fall unconscious and then you pick them back up as you're standing up. And everybody just kind of hand waves that as kind of a given, right? As if the players always have their weapons glued into their hands. But at the same time, it's like you do drop your weapon, and there is that situation where you would, as part of your move action, stand up and pick those up at the same time. I have no issues with that. I think drawing or stowing a weapon, obviously in rules as written, it's allowed. I think that picking it up off the ground is just the same. You may, like, if it's a particularly hazardous situation, then you may be like, okay, well, you're going to get disadvantage on this attack because you're surrounded by enemies or something like that. To prevent you from being that kind of like, oh, I'm just going to drop it and pick it up whenever I want kind of thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say is you do need to have a reaction if your GM does allow you to drop the item as part of your reaction. And I believe it was Xanthar's introduced an ability that lets you identify a spell that's being cast or as a reaction. So you can basically identify a spell and as that action, drop it. Again, if somebody's casting heat metal on you, you can react, identify it, and drop your sword at the same time. And it's just
All right. Well, it sounds like, Preston, you might be in agreement for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those weird areas where the one thing I don't want to do whenever I allow or disallow something at my table is I don't want to cheapen the experience for the people who like Corey said, if they took that Warcaster feat, now I'm kind of invalidating a little bit of that by allowing those kind of.
Sure. I mean, there are other benefits to Warcaster, obviously, but
I think if I did allow it, I guess it would be on a case per case basis. Like, for instance, remind me with the Shadow Blade, right? What if you throw that at somebody? Does it take an action or bonus action to reappear in your hand?
You can bring it back as a bonus action.
As a bonus action. So I mean, in those kind of cases, like if you were to toss it on the ground or something, or there would have to be some negative consequence for me to allow it, in the sense of, like, for instance, if someone has a heavy crossbow, they want to fire one, throw it off, and they've got a second action to attack and whatever. I guess for me, there would just have to be a justification, and it would have to be on a case by case basis. I don't know that I would just say as a table rule to do that, because like Corey said, it would be a little dangerous to say as a because usually with reactions you're doing like one thing, right? So just basic rules is written where we have, like, in your turn. What's up?
What's that behind you, Preston?
Yeah, I was going to ask. It looks like we've got some new art.
Yeah,
I do.
Just noticed
we had an art submission. So
on the Reddit,
yes,
the subreddit thread. Okay.
So the community art spotlight. It's not necessarily a contest or anything else. This is something where people can submit their art and everyone can come through and upvote and decide kind of what we want to showcase as a community. So
cool.
This was one that was. I'm going to get out of the way here.
Yeah, let's see it. Ooh,
so this one is pretty awesome.
Foxy.
This is by Art of Avis. So if you want to check them out on Instagram, it's art.ofavis, one word. We can put that down in the comments, I assume. But this is a commission for Trixie, a Kitsune barbarian. I thought they did an awesome job.
Yeah, that's very cool.
wanted to give them kudos on their D&D.
Love me some Fox Girls.
Thanks, Art of Abyss. And
Great
anyone
job.
else who wants us to display, feel free to send it our way. We'd be happy to give you a little exposure.
Kickback.
Cool. Okay, so Mr. Rogers, do we have any good cops in the house today, or am I screwed?
I think you're kind of screwed on this one.
I need to get Tori in here. Tori.
So I think the main reason you take Warcaster really is the advantage to your con saves, but you still get the bonus of being able to have a sword and a shield or 2 swords or whatever and cast spells. So I don't want to cheapen that at all.
And you get to cast a cantrip as a what's sort of attack of opportunity. Yeah.
So those are the main reasons you're taking it, but I still don't want to cheapen any piece of that. So yes, I'm in agreement. There may be a scenario like if you're about to die or something and you throw up reaction, I might take pity as a GM and be like, yes, fine, go for it. Yeah. And then maybe you just lose your bonus action on your next turn or something. I don't know.
You know what would be really cool is, all right, you get to drop your weapon so that you can throw up your shield spell, but the force of it is going to push you back 20 feet. So you have to run back to your weapons and pick them up,
or
something
toss
like that.
Toss your weapon and have your weapon slide across the ground or something.
Yeah. And that's if it's thematically appropriate to add that description for that spell into combat.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And it looks like I'm going to have to make an adjustment to my Bladesinger build that I'm planning on doing for our 5,000 subscriber bonus episode. Spoiler. Okay, so let's move on to the larger discussion then. I wanted to talk about combat, but specifically about how we as players and DMs describe combat as it happens in game. So a little background. As you guys all know, I started playing AD&D way back in my junior high days, right?
My day.
Yeah, exactly. And when I was
85,
knee high to a grasshopper, not quite that long ago, but it may have been the late 80s. Anyway, so we were kids, right? We didn't know what we were doing. We were rolling dice. I'm 100% confident that my dungeon master fudged 90% of the rolls just to mess with us. It's just one of those things. And it was great. And I have very fond memories. When we started playing as a group 3.5 years ago now, I have a very vivid memory of our first session. And one of the first things that happened was my character, Ariana, challenged this creature to a fight, and it was very obvious that it was not a fight I could win, and I was gonna die, and I was like, you know what? I'm a level 1 character. I can make somebody else, I guess. Let's just do this, because this is what my character would do. And I went into combat, and the character that I was fighting rolled a natural 1 on their attack against me, and it was the first time, and Corey, this is me singing your praises. The way that you described what happened, right, was the first time that I'd ever seen anything like that in a D&D game, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit. It was like, oh my gosh, you just made this thing that is already a lot of fun and imaginative and cool and creative into this sort of pseudo cinematic experience where the guy goes to attack me and my monk jumps up in the air and does this awesome acrobatic move and breaks their spear in half and stuff. And I was just like, that was so cool. And then on the next turn I died, right? Because they got their sword out and impaled me, or at least went unconscious, I guess. But regardless, it was this amazing experience. And I see people on forums and things talk a lot about, describing combat. Do you describe your combat for your players? Do you let your players do it? How do you do it? Which is better? Why? Tips and tricks, all that kind of stuff. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that with you guys and maybe ask a couple of questions. First off, do you as a DM like to describe combat in your game? Why or why not?
I'll go first because mine's the easiest. You already answered it.
Yeah.
I do like describing combat. I don't do it as often as I'd like. Obviously, you can't describe the same sword swings every turn because then it gets boring. I do it at thematically appropriate times, and I do it to kind of emphasize good hits or glancing blows, that sort of thing. And I feel like description is a great way to kind of give your players information about how the monsters are reacting to their attacks without actually giving it away, right? Like if you say that this you hit the creature with a blast of fire and he shrugs it off as if it doesn't do anything, then people can be like, okay, he's either got resistance or he's immune to fire damage. I need to look out for that kind of thing, and then they can start planning ahead and kind of. But if I were to just not tell you, like, because you don't know that information because you didn't make any sort of check, then you could sit there and do like 5 fireballs on a single creature, and then it doesn't do any damage, and then you just wasted 5 spell slots. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe yes, twofold purposes. One, to sort of enhance the cinematic, imaginative, whatever experience, but also to convey information to your players in a way that doesn't feel overly metagamey. Oh, by the way, this creature is resistant to fire damage.
Yeah.
You know,
and if they're not really getting that, like I'll watch the group, and if they're not really understanding what I'm saying, I'll be like, it's like they have some sort of resistance, kind of thing, and just kind of edge them along, or move them along there. The other thing is
resistance.
Yeah, stop using fire, dummy. The other thing is I'm a writer. I'm an unpublished writer, but I'm a writer, and the idea of getting cool descriptions and cool moves in there is just too much for me to not want to do, right? Like, and it sometimes evolves into like, there's no way that this character could have done this without making some sort of acrobatic check. But I always hand wave those because I like the idea of you like jumping over the ogre and slicing its behind its neck, or I think one time on this on the show I actually described a ranger leaning back as their bear stood up to attack, and then slicing the guy behind him and everything. And it's like maybe that might not be allowed in normal tables, but in my table it's like, if you give me a good description, or I can come up with a good description, I'm going to, and it's going to work because it's just too fun.
It's the Legolas doing the impossible flip onto the horse, breaking physics moment,
or sliding down the stairs on a shield, shooting arrows.
There's a lot of
trunk.
Or literally Marioing up a bunch of falling cobblestones, since we're talking about all of them. But that's the thing, is like, that has a huge stigma around it these days because it's so overdone, and people are just like, oh my gosh, the graceful elf does it again and never runs out of arrows. But at the same time, it's like, no, that's really cool. That's what makes fantasy cool, is having these characters that do amazing feats that they shouldn't be able to do, but somehow pull off. Yeah.
What do you guys think, Mr. Rogers?
I do like the descriptions. It depends on the scenario. If it's just like 2 damage here, I might not describe that. Just like, you hit him. If it's massive damage, I'm like, you hit him in the stomach and he coughs up some blood or whatever. Like, I'll give some sort of description. But when it comes to players getting the kill, I'll usually pass that over to the player and be like, okay,
how do you want to do this?
The Matt Mercer, how do you want to do this? Or describe how you want to kill this creature, and let them kind of take over the reins for the creative portion of that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that makes sense. I think describing combat is awesome, and probably has the potential as well to slow down what is already maybe the slowest part of a Dungeons and Dragons session, right? Combat. Yes. And especially if you have a big table with 5, 6, 7 players who are only getting their turn every 10 or 15 minutes, right? That can be like, you might want to look for ways to streamline it. But I do love the descriptive moments. What do you think about it? Oh, go ahead, Corey.
Sorry, I was going to say about the whole describing your kill thing. I like to do a half and half, because having a player describe how they kill every goblin that they take out is a little lackluster. Like the big mobs, I'll give it to the player. Like, how do you want to take care of this? If it's just like 1 in a dozen orcs that you're fighting, I'll just describe you decapitating them or running them through, kind of thing, and then move on, because it makes it a little bit quicker. Because not every moment needs to be epic, but there should be epic moments.
Yeah, but at least always for me, the big bad of that encounter. So if there's a boss and 3 minions, maybe the 3 minions don't get a description, but the boss, you definitely are going to have some cinematic, awesome description of how he went down.
What do you think, Preston?
Yeah, I think I err. This is echo chamber at this point from what I'm gonna say, but I do. Yeah, I like to. I enjoy, as a DM, I enjoy describing combat. I enjoy kind of giving them that. Okay, you swing and you hit, or hey, you miss, or hey, they seem to be somewhat resistant to whatever just happened, or like you hit them and suddenly all the burn marks start to disappear, and they're like, oh no, he has regenerative abilities, or. And I'm guilty as any to giving the whole, like, you slice him stem to stern and his guts just spill out all over the whatever, and whoever's nearby, make a dex saving throw or you're gonna get guts on you, or that's just something that's at least in some of the other groups that seems to be kind of a staple. But on the character side, like. I'm kind of conflicted there, where on one side I enjoy it when a player says, I pull out my staff and I want to like start doing this and I'm going to say these words and cast fireball on this person, which to me is wonderful, because then it's like, okay, they're getting into it, like I can see it in my head what they're trying to do, and it's not just me interpreting how they're doing the attack. But the one thing I do try and shy away from is like called shots, because if I've done that a lot of times where I'm like, I'm gonna cut his hand off, and then it's like, actually no, you rolled a natural one. It's like, I don't cut his hand off and my rapier breaks, or so it's trying to temper that, as well as with like the other things in combat where if you find you have a table that they don't enjoy kind of describing it, or you find that you're starting to lose interest every time you're describing these combats, it feels like either you need to optimize combat better, where, hey, if you're going to roll your attacks, just go ahead and roll both attacks. I'll call which one it is and roll the damage with the attacks at the same time. So then it's not you don't have that as much transactional waiting for the next person in line to do their thing.
Right.
And that could also help as a DM, because then I can see, okay, they did this and then this, and look, oh wow, he had like 2 hit points left. How do you want this person to go down? Oh, well, I want to go ahead and slice this, and maybe the ogres, they got him down to 1 hit point. It's brings him down to a knee, and then the last they stick their dagger up into the bottom of his throat, into his brain or something. I don't know.
Are you saying that you should talk to your DM or players and
I
do the game best for you?
And
what a new concept for the show.
That's crazy. But it's
almost
really
like that's the theme of the show.
As a DM, you just want to be sensitive to the players, because if they're getting lost and you see people like jumping on their phones, it's probably because they don't feel like there's something that is engaging them at that moment. And I'm notorious for like, hey, so and so, make a dex check or dex save or something. Like, what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Oh, suddenly there's a new skeleton near you. Now you're like somehow involved in the combat, or not to be like a douchey DM, but just like to help them feel like they're having meaningful impact.
There's risk and they're engaged.
To go along with your called shots rule, not in combat unless you count social situations as combat, which I do. When I ever do a intimidation, diplomacy, persuasion, any sort of check like that, I always roll the check before I say anything, because there's been too many times where I'll give this grand speech and then I'll be like, okay, and then I need to roll my dexterity, my charisma check, and then I'm like, oh well, instead I just vomit all over the place, I guess whatever. I guess all that cool stuff I said.
In my head, this is how it played out, but what actually came out of my mouth was something different.
So I usually say something like, I want to persuade the king to help or to send extra aid to this village. And if my DM, most of the DMs, you guys mostly just go, okay, roll it, and then I roll it and I say, okay, and then you go, what do you say? Kind of thing. And that's always the way that I would do it as a DM is, okay, give me the check first. Okay, I'll tell you if it fails or succeeds, and then you say what your character says, and then if it's a low check, then you get to have a fun moment where your character literally makes a faux pas, and you get to come up with some sly way to insult the king,
or where they fail their performance check as a bard and instead decide to throw a dagger at one of the
no survivors. There cannot be anyone, no witnesses
that knows that you're bad.
No one leaves that room.
Persuasion.
Okay, so a couple of things. One, I was just thinking as you were talking, Corey, that maybe though it might be cool to give the speech first, and if it's good enough, your DM might let you roll with advantage.
Yeah.
So then you can hopefully bypass that crappy initial roll.
I'll give you guys a behind the scenes here. If you give a really good speech beforehand and then try to roll persuasion, I will give you advantage for it.
Or the DC will somehow magically become 1.
Yeah. Yeah, it really depends. Like there's some times where I get inspired by your speeches and I'm just like, okay, that succeeds.
Yeah. Or if you don't convince the king, maybe you convince one of the guys, other people in the room. They're like, hey, I heard what you said after that thing. I agree with you.
So now getting back to combat, some people I think would argue, and you guys have kind of talked around this a little bit, but that no, and in fact, I'll bet some commenters to this video might say something like this. You should always have your players describe combat. I'm guessing that is because it gives them more ownership, keeps them involved, and helps them feel cool, whatever the reasons may be. But what are your guys' thoughts on that? When do you allow your player to? When do you want to sort of take the reins? We've talked about maybe against a big bad and how do you want to do this, but are there other times where you would sort of want to prompt your players more to describe what they're doing and tell me what's happening in combat?
I love players that just take the initiative with their descriptions. It makes my job as a DM a lot easier. So I have no problem if a player comes to their turn and they're like, all right, I take my sword and I'm going to cast this spell. So I reach into my pouch and I do this, and then they're just describing their action leading up to it. That's completely fine with me. Once they hit and it's kind of out of their control now because they don't know how much hit points the monster has and things like that, that's kind of where I would take over as the DM. But if they want to describe, everything leading up to it, or like they throw their cape back and it flutters in the wind as they draw their crossbow, or whatever you want to do.
If it's your turn, you set the stage, I do the reaction. If it's my turn, I set the stage, and then you do the reaction, kind of thing.
It makes it much easier to do that. Yes, and then that way you can continue that narrative. Because then, if you don't let your players do that, and then let's say that person wants to, hey, I want to shoot my crossbow, but I want to shoot it and I want to hit the stalactite above whoever. If I'm just saying, okay, you shoot your crossbow, who are you hitting? Well, I'm gonna hit that person. Then it doesn't offer that many opportunities for creative, like rewarding creative behavior from your players, because then you get into those like, okay, hey, there's you're in a lumber yard. There's a giant thing of lumber. Okay, I want to unhitch the big chain that's holding them all down. I want it to roll down the hill and smash all these goblins that are attacking us. Or it just gives them more of those feel cool moments outside of that transactional. Okay, I shoot, ouch. Oop, I shoot, ouch. You don't have those kind of battles where it's just linear.
Right. So speaking of kind of describing, using combat description to sort of convey information to your players without just conveying the information, right? Is there a point at which I read, I think it was a comment on one of our previous videos, where somebody talked about how, oh, you know what? No, this was a house rule thing that I read about last week. Anyway, that there's like a bloodied condition that they use at their table, where it's like once they hit a certain threshold, like now they're considered bloodied, and the DM actually would say, okay, this character is now bloodied, right? And maybe that's too overt for your taste, but is there a point at which you kind of do say, okay, once they're at 50% or 25% or 10 hit points or whatever the case may be, where you try to convey that information to your players, and how do you do it, and why or why not?
So that bloodied rule is a house rule that carried over from 4th edition. Mr. Resident 4th edition man here.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Take another drink. Basically what bloodied was is you're at your half hit points, and monsters that were bloodied sometimes got extra abilities, so you had to be careful, or your abilities triggered additional damage against bloodied creatures. So there was kind of a give and take there. I really like the bloodied rule, and it's really hard for me, having spent so many years playing 4th edition, not saying, oh, you bloodied him, oh, he's bloodied, kind of thing. And it's like because then the players know, like, okay, so we've dealt this much damage to him, so that means he's only got he's at least got this much health left. But I still will be like, oh yeah, he's looking worse for wear, usually when they start getting low, that kind of thing, because I don't want a max level wizard to look at the guy that's at 10 hit points and go meteor swarm, you know, unless you want to overkill. Yeah, exactly. Unless you want to overkill, that's fine. But me describing it as he looks like he could fall over with a stiff breeze, you know, or something like that. It kind of conveys that whole like, oh, this guy's really low. I can take him out with kind of an AoE damage. Yeah, exactly. And that's just a way that I help my players and keep them from going a little too deep. And that some DMs don't like that.
Sure. But I think at the same time, it's not overly, personal opinion, not overly metagamey, right? If we're really in a melee combat and we're attacking and swinging our weapons and casting spells at each other, and one guy is just about to drop, like, it's going to be fairly obvious to me, I think, right? That he's bleeding, he's panting, he's, you know, his legs cut off below the knee, like he's going down.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that
depends a lot on how you describe your damage, right? Because we talked about we talked about it off channel here, but we've talked about using hits as wearing down armor and wearing down your stamina rather than just a swift kill.
That's a segue. Nice segue. But you're jumping the gun. So
oh my gosh.
So let me go there. Let me go there. Okay, so I'm going to read you guys a quote from Gary Gygax. And he was describing, this was back in Dragon Magazine in 1979. Dragon issue number 24, if you want to look it up.
2 years before Colby started playing.
Easy. This is the quote. Let's see. HP. Okay, sorry, hold on. Hit points are a combination of actual physical constitution, skill at the avoidance of taking real physical damage, luck and or magical or divine factors. 10 points of damage dealt to a rhino indicates a considerable wound, while the same damage sustained by the 8th level fighter indicates a near miss, or a slight wound, or a bit of luck used up, a bit of fatigue piling up against his or her skill at avoiding the fatal cut or thrust. So even when a hit is scored in melee combat, it is more often than not a grazing blow, a mere light wound, which would have been fatal or nearly so to a lesser mortal. If sufficient numbers of such wounds accrue to the character, however, stamina, skill, and luck will eventually run out, and an attack will strike home. So, you know, in this description, in the way that it's described there, it almost makes hit points more of an abstract concept, I think, than a literal one, right? And it's kind of like, well, this is sort of my defensive abilities and my luck and my, you know, divine favor and whatever, all sort of helping me out. And before I ask for your reaction to it, let me just say, for me personally, I really love this. There is, and I've mentioned this to you guys before, I think, one of my favorite video games of all time, Knights of the Old Republic. And this was a BioWare game, my favorite game developer. And the thing that I loved, one of the things that I loved so much about that game is that it was a Star Wars game, obviously, and you're often, as you do in Star Wars games, having lightsaber combat. But of course, as everybody knows, if you get hit with a lightsaber, it's a laser sword and it cuts you in half, right? And so you're not just like wailing on somebody with a lightsaber. You'd get into combat and the animations were such that, you know, you'd be swinging and your enemy would be blocking and you'd be parrying and have this great sort of dance, you know, of sword play. All the while, you know, my hit points are going down a little bit. Their hit points are going down a little bit. You know, hit points are dropping. Nobody's actually hitting anybody. We're just sort of wearing each other's defenses down. And then, yeah, when somebody would drop to 0, boom, you'd land the killing blow and kill them with your lightsaber. And I love that because to me, it feels more realistic, right? If there's a hulking barbarian with a great axe swinging at me, if he actually hits me, I'm probably going to die, right? Or like, it's very unlikely that I'm going to survive more than 1 or possibly 2 swings from a great axe from a raging barbarian. So there's my question. What are your thoughts on sort of describing combat in this way? What do you think the pros and cons of it are? Is it something you think you'd want to do in your game? Why not?
Yeah, I can start us off.
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of do that in a lot of ways right now, is basically where when as combat kind of progresses, so also referring to the bloodied rule, where I don't have like a hard and fast when they hit X%, now I'm going to start describing them as haggard or they're out of breath or what have you. It's usually I try and look at how much damage those characters are doing over that combat to them, and I'll start to change the way that I kind of describe that person. So like at first they're very like, if someone's willing to fight you, they're going to be really kind of all in, ready to go. And then after as things go on, maybe, you know, if the captain gets killed or what have you, then the other people start to hold back. But through that combat, there's things that I'll try and give cues like, you know, you hit him, and if it's a natural 20, obviously, okay, you've cut him on the arm or something. There's some kind of critical damage. He can no longer hold his shield up. So that gives them the cue that, hey, maybe now his AC's gone down because he can't hold his shield arm up. Or that he's had a bow and you just cut the bow in half with your great axe. Oh, great. Now like he's going to have to switch up tactics on what he's trying to do there. But I try and incorporate that in. So like if a character's playing and they're paying enough attention to what's going on based on those cues, I want to try and give them, because I don't want to be like, okay, well, how many, I don't ever want someone to say, well, how many hit points does he have? Or, you know, that get to that level of metagaming. But they should just know, okay, we've done 100 something damage to this guy. He's huffing and puffing, and he's starting to kind of drop. He's missing a leg. He's not very mobile. You know, you guys are probably on the verge of killing this guy. Yeah. But or if it's gouts of blood versus, you know, if you hit somebody and maybe they don't have a bell guard on their sword or for whatever stupid reason, and they lose a finger, you know, it's going to be mildly inconvenient, but it's not going to be life threatening in the immediate, you know, combat time frame. So,
what do you think, Mr. Rogers?
I like it. I think the way that I tend to describe combat is like when you hit somebody, like, yeah, you hit them, but maybe they kind of got their sword in, but it just was at like a wrong angle, and so you still hit them. Or you hit them, but it was directly on like a heavy part of their armor, and yeah, you've left a dent on their armor, but they're still going. So yeah, I like that. I think the combat kind of makes more sense that way. Like you said, if a barbarian just comes and hacks at you, you're going to be cut down. So it makes more sense that, yeah, you got hit, but you were able to get your shield up, and it just, you know, really rattled you, and now your arm hurts really bad or whatever. Or you took a hit and now your armor's dented and it's kind of poking at you. And so every time you move that area, you're just feeling that scratch of that armor on you or whatever. I think that's awesome. I like it.
Well, and for big bads, I feel like that can also open up those cinematic opportunities of like, okay, you're fighting this dragon and one of the scales falls off and you start to see, you know, dragon heart type exposure or smog, you know, like, oh, now the players start getting laser focused on, all right, I want to shoot at that spot, or, you know, giving them those ways to feel more epic. Or, you know, you could take the video game approach too at the end of that, where let's say you do fell the enemy and then suddenly something triggers and he hits his second form. Yep. And you start fighting him, or he hits his final form, you know, like that was the thing about Final Fantasy games that I always hated and loved at the same time, is you get to the end and you'd be like, okay, I just burnt everything. He falls and then he stands back up and you're just like, that's
reload,
it.
Like, reload the last save. What do you think, Corey?
So I like the concept, but I have a few issues with it, as usual with what my answers are, I suppose. I like the fact that it's a combination of multiple things, including stamina and like just general wear and tear on armor. In fact, every mage that I ever run as an NPC always has a magical barrier protecting them, a magical shield protecting them at all times, because if you swing a sword at a mage and hit him and he's wearing a robe, he's not going to survive. And like even if you're a monk, you know, getting punched is not going to be really a good thing. But at the same time, I never want to describe my players that you hit, you deal damage, and the description comes out as he barely dodges out of the way and you know, strains himself doing it, because then it feels like your player just got robbed. Right. Your player just got robbed of damage.
Yeah. you still should hit every time. I agree.
I can see that. And you know, honestly, I almost feel like depending on the character, depending on the weapon they're using, depending on a number of things, you know, it might make more sense. For example, if I'm a barbarian swinging a great axe, sure, like maybe I can understand that if I really hit this guy swinging as hard as I can, like full on in the chest, he's going to die. So like we've got to like, you know, we've got to figure out what this looks like. Or, you know, maybe I'm denting the armor, maybe I'm denting the shield, maybe I'm something. But if I'm a rogue and I'm sneaking up behind somebody and I'm whipping out my dagger and I'm going to stab them in the back and get a critical hit and things like that, and you're like, wow, you did like 90% of their health.
They dodge out of the way.
Yeah, your dagger like glances off the side of their, you know, whatever. It's like, oh, that just doesn't feel as cool, right? One thing that I wanted to add, though, and another reason why I do like this sort of method of describing combat, I guess, is because it's always struck me as a little odd in 5e that I could take a short, I could get down to, you know, 10% of my hit points and take a 1 hour short rest, maybe throw a couple of band-aids on and like roll some hit dice. And I'm like, good to go, like back to 100% health. You know what I mean? Or, you know, get to the end of the day, I'm battered, I'm bruised, I'm broken. I nearly got decapitated. I'm, you know, I've got hit by 12 battle axes and, you know, 17 arrows from goblins. And I'm just like, okay, take a good night's rest, wake up. I'm like, all right, ready to go. Like all my wounds are healed and I'm feeling fantastic. So I think the nice thing about if combat is, you know, more a series of near misses and maybe nicks and hard hits, but more bruises than deep cuts, you know what I mean? Then it makes it a lot easier to sort of imagine. For me, it's less immersion breaking, I guess. If at the end of a short rest, I can roll some hit dice and be like, all right, like I've rejuvenated, like, you know, my energy's back, my wits are all about me. You know, I had a sandwich and you know, I've rejuvenated my luck and, you know, my divine favor and I'm ready to go. I don't know. But anyway, I feel like Corey, you were going to add something else, and I kind of cut you off.
Yeah, no, I think what you're getting at here is the difference between monsters and players. Players should always be erring on the side of that. We take glancing blows that hit our armor more than anything, or we get a little winded when we lose HP rather than taking severe damage. And like Gygax said in his little description, if it's a certain hit points or more, maybe it is a wound that you have to deal with. Sure. And maybe that does have long-lasting consequences. If you want to be that type of GM, or if you want to be that type of player that says, oh yeah, I just took 40 damage in a row, well that, you know, injured my arm and it's going to take 2 days to heal, kind of thing. But at the same time, with monsters, definitely don't do that. Monsters you just beat until they're dead. But I like the idea that players are just like, oh yeah, I need to, this hour is me stitching up my armor and it's me recovering and just recuperating from all the exertion that I just went through. And maybe I have a few cuts that I can bandage up really quickly. Yeah. Otherwise you just have to suspend disbelief and just be like, okay, a rest is a rest.
I think most DMs probably kind of hand wave a long rest and a short rest, but really if you did do role play and play that out, it would be them fixing their armor, you know, bandaging up, things like that. So makes sense, but it's just one of those things. It's kind of not that important to the game. So DMs kind of just go, all right, you use your hit dice and now we get on to the next thing.
And that's why there's no rules of being like the players can do stuff during a short rest other than resting, right? Is because the idea is that you're automatically taking care of all those things to prep you for the next combat and recover that HP loss. So you're not doing anything like cooking or writing a new spell in your book or anything like that.
Yeah. Or unless you're a bard, in which case you're playing your lute.
Yep.
Your song of rest.
So that everyone else can recover more hit points. No, I like that. I like the concept of maybe a hybrid approach where like combat looks like this for monsters, it looks like this for players. And it makes it sort of more believable because at least unless it's like a big named NPC that you're going to face multiple times throughout the arc of a campaign or something like that, right? Monsters aren't going to be taking short rests later, so there's no need to worry about the suspension of disbelief. Nope, they're just going to be dead, or I will be, I suppose.
Or monsters, the downtrodden people.
No.
For monsters.
Okay, well, awesome. Anything else that anybody wanted to add about combat, particularly as it pertains to describing combat in game?
I did want to say with descriptions, as a DM, you need to be mindful. There's two things that I would say. So there's like a level of abstraction that you have when you're describing things, and I might have said this on another video. I don't know. So if I did, I'm sorry, whatever. But when you describe something and you get very specific, now everybody sees the same thing. Whereas you say something kind of generic,
right?
It allows the players to imagine what they want to imagine. So keep that in mind as a DM. If you see a dog on the street or whatever, and you say, "Oh, it's a white dog," everyone imagines their own white dog. But if you start getting specific, it's got a limp, it's got a bandage, it's got eye, now it's very specific. And the same thing applies to combat. Okay, you hit him with your sword. That looks very different to everybody. But if you say the monster draws its silver sword as it gleams in the sun and jabs downward, like now it's much more everybody's seeing the same thing. So it just depends on how you want to control that narrative with which one of those descriptions you're going to use.
Yep. And your player is going to go at the end of combat and be like, "Hey, I want to pick up his silver sword in case we find any werewolves."
Exactly.
And then you have to be like, "Oh, well, he didn't actually have a silver sword, but okay, I guess he does now." You either have to give it to him
yes,
or not. And you have to be very generic unless you want to be specific.
Exactly. Don't over describe your doors and your chairs because they'll think they're mimics.
Yep.
Also in the combat arena, something that when we're talking about things that have kind of been like perplexing or what have you, I think we've touched on this in a previous episode, but like for me, I watch a lot of anime, and a lot of times there's those moments where it's like they've unlocked XYZ power, you know what I'm saying? And it can be a good opportunity for the player to give players ideas, I guess. If you want to come into combat and you're like, "Hey, I'm a warlock and I just unlocked this new super cool spell and I want to showcase it a little bit," take that a little bit and run with it. Like at the beginning, okay, hey, you're not sure about this power. You start to cast this, and then it's a lot more powerful than you expect it to be. You fire it off. Hopefully it hits something, or it's Chaos Bolt and it never hits anything ever.
Yeah. If you're Preston, yes, that's true.
But
no, I like that.
Have those kind of like engaging ways, or like for Draconic, so the Aberrant Dragon Mark and things. Sometimes people want to go with that, with the epic boons. Find ways to work that into your combat so that it's like, hey, you're fighting against this Yuan Ti, and this boon is actually activated when they bite into you, and suddenly you realize that the poison is not affecting you, or that kind of stuff.
Right. Right.
I would love to see what our players' greatest kill is, or what not our players, our viewers. Yeah. Your players. You can be our players. What our players' greatest kill is.
Players.
Yeah. Basically, consider this the comment section a hunting lodge now, and you have to describe your most wonderful kill that you ever had on Safari, and just give us what your best kill ever was, the great descriptions that you have, because I want to hear them. I want it.
Does this include they caught a fish this big, but they describe it as this big?
Oh, yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Feel
definitely
free to
big fish.
Embellish away.
Embellish. Awesome. No, that's great. So yes, please do let us know in the comments. Also, don't forget to check out our subreddit, D&D Optimized, especially if you would like to show off your art, as we mentioned earlier. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the show this week. So thanks, everybody.
Think I can get an Uber out here to Barovia?
I'll send my.
We can send Trixie. Trixie will come get you.
There we go. Right the one shot. I want to see it.
More victims.
Rescuing Mr. Rogers from Barovia.
In the wrong neighborhood.
I like
Mr.
it.
Rogers in the wrong neighborhood.
I mentioned earlier that we're almost at 5,000 subscribers and been growing like crazy, which is awesome. And so yes, we do have a special little episode coming up in honor of that we'll hopefully be recording sometime later this week. So stay tuned. And other than that, you guys are awesome. Love you. Thanks for watching. And yeah, we will see you soon. Thanks to all my DMs. Have a good one, guys.